Hi guys, today I'll be showing you how to draw fluffy feathers, and I'll be showing you by drawing this fluffy duckling in graphite pencil. Before we start the drawing, let's take a minute to look at the reference together. Now when you actually look at this duckling, it has fluffy feathers, but when you look at how they actually look in the reference, they look far more like fur. So we're going to draw it like fur. Now whenever I draw in graphite, I always like to work in layers. So I'm going to begin here with an HB pencil, and I'm going to start by just marking out the fur. So what I'm doing here is I'm working in flicking motions that's going in the direction of the feathers. By flicking motions, I mean with a very sort of loose hand, gently brushing the paper with the pencil. So I'm going to begin here by going upwards, and then as I make my way around the head, I'm going to start going over to the left-hand side. Now it's not just the direction of the feathers that I want to keep in mind here. I also want to be looking at the length of the feathers. So for example, on the top of this duckling's head here, the feathers are sort of mid-length. So I'm making mid-length strokes. When I get to other areas that I'll show you in a minute, there's some areas with much shorter feathers and some with much longer feathers. So I'll adjust my pencil strokes when I get there. Once I built up some of these pencil strokes on an area though, I then also want to just apply a bit more shading. There's always going to be a certain amount of gaps in between my pencil strokes, but because the top of this duckling's head is so dark, I want to try and remove any white paper that can be seen there. So what I'm doing is I'm working still very lightly in little circular motions instead, just very lightly shading over the top, almost with the side of my pencil. Once I've done that, I can also start adding some feather strokes around the top of this duckling's eye. So here they are much shorter feathers, so as I said, I'm going to do much shorter strokes with my pencil. There may be some areas where I want to do a little bit of shading on top as well, but the feathers are much lighter here, so I won't need to do as much. Similar applies to this area at the back of the duckling's head. This is more of a mid-tone area, but they are quite long feathers here. So once again, long strokes with my pencil, and then very light shading over the top, but I don't want to do too much. So I'm going to keep lightly filling in these feathers for the duckling's head, and then I can move on to doing the duck's little chest area. So most of the duck's feathers are very fluffy, but actually this area at the front, it probably is fluffy, but it's very wet, so I need to draw it slightly differently. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to draw some of the shapes that I can see in the reference, which is particularly some kind of V shapes. So I'm going to draw these V's, and then there's not really any feathery texture around here beyond the V's. So I'm going to just do some light shading with the side of my pencil to add in any shadows that I need to. Although this area right now looks pretty uninspiring, it will all come together when the duck as a whole is drawn. So now I can carry on and draw the rest of the duck's body. So this is where the feathers are the longest, so I'm going to be doing my longest pencil strokes. There's some streaks of lighter feathers going through some of these darker ones, so I don't want to overdo it there and risk losing those streaks. So once again, really focus on the direction of the feathers and just apply the pencil very lightly. You're not expecting it to look amazing at this point. This is really just a case of adding a base. This is going to take a little while, so whilst I'm doing that, if you want to draw along with me in real time, I have the full in-depth tutorial on my Patreon. I also have many other graphite and colour pencil tutorials too, and I'm adding to it constantly. Check out the link in the description. Alright, I've got to the end of applying all these pencil strokes now with the HB pencil. What I want to do is blend this all together. So I'm just going to use a piece of tissue that I've wrapped around my finger. I can then gently blend this going in the direction of the feathers. I've wrapped it around my finger rather than just scrunching it in a ball because I do want to be relatively accurate as I do this. So I'm going in the direction of the feathers, just working my way around the drawing. I don't need to press hard as I do this. If I come to an area where I've blended it a bit and I want it to blend more, I'll just keep going over that area until it's as blended as I'd like it to be. And what I'm aiming for by the end of this is a pretty blurry looking duckling. but that'll create a nice base that we can then keep creating these fluffy feathers on. So as I said, whenever I draw with graphite, I like to work in layers. So what I want to do now is move on to a softer pencil that's going to make the darks a little bit darker and increase the contrast. So I'm going to use a 5B pencil here, and I'm basically going to do exactly the same thing again, but this time focusing on the darker feathers. So I want to shade in this whole area on the top of the duckling's head, still working in these flicking motions and still making sure I pay attention to the direction of the feathers. And moving on to the back of the duckling's head where it's more of that mid-tone, and I am also going to add some more of this softer pencil to the bulk of the duck's face, the lighter, shorter area. Although as I'm doing this here, I'm not only using flicking motions, I am also once again shading with the side of my pencil, just so very lightly, because I don't want to lose the lightness of that area. I'm going to once again just define these little V feathers I was talking about on the front here, and then work over the whole of the duck's body once again. So you can see that at this point it is kind of looking like a fluffy duckling, but it is also looking a little bit washed out. I still don't have enough contrast here at the moment. But before we do that, I want to brighten up some areas. So because this duckling is fluffy, around the edges it's got quite a lot of little wispy feathers, and you can see those feathers in front of the slightly darker background. So I want to add those in. What I'm going to use here is an electric eraser. Electric erasers are very good if you want to add small details. That said, if you don't have one, you could mold a putty eraser into quite a thin shape to make similar lines. So I'm basically going to work around the edge of the duckling using the eraser in the same way that I was using the pencil. So making these little flicking motions that are going to add these wispy feathers. This duckling does also have some little water droplets on it, so I'm going to add those in while I'm here. And now the last thing I want to do is, as I said before, increase that contrast with one more layer of pencil. Now what I'm going to use is a black polychromos pencil. I like them because they're matte black and they go really nicely over the top of graphite. That said, if you don't have a black polychromos pencil, you could use a softer graphite pencil, something like an 8B would work well. And I want to once again go over the darkest parts of the whole duckling. Although on the most part this time I'm not using flicking hair motions. Because I want to deepen things down, I'm going to use little circular motions to just build up some shading on here, and that'll deepen down the darkest parts. That said though, around the edges I do want to add some feather-like motions because I want to make those baby hairs that we created with the eraser look like they're more at the back. I don't want them right at the front of the drawing. So I'm going to work my way over the whole duckling one more time with this pencil, but only the darkest areas. I'm also going to be focusing on where the duckling is meeting the water and just deepening down that a bit because it'll make the duckling look more like it's sitting on the water. And that's it. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, give it a like, and don't forget you can see the full tutorial with the real-time footage on my Patreon. Check out the link in the description. Happy drawing guys, I'll see you in the next one.